Good evening, everybody. It's great to see you tonight. Thanks for being here for this time of Bible study. We're having a fun study right now. In this class, we're studying characters, Old Testament characters, which is always, I think, very enjoyable, but I think really a practical kind of study. We can make good application of things that we see, both good examples and negative, bad examples. We can learn from both, and we obviously see both in various Bible characters. We're studying a great man of God tonight. If you're looking at your study guide, we're on lesson 4, and we're talking about Joshua. And Joshua, of course, a very powerful and great man of God, and much to be admired and emulated. So the lesson starts out by describing the first sort of exposure to Joshua in Exodus chapter 17. In Exodus chapter 17, beginning at verse 8, "Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said to Joshua, 'Choose us out men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand.' So Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses and Aaron and Hur went up to the top of the mountain. And it came to pass when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat thereon, and Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, the one on one side and the other on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. And the Lord said to Moses, 'Write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven.' And Moses built an altar and called the name of the place Jehovah Nissi. For he said, 'Because the Lord has sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation.'" All right. So again, this is sort of our first exposure to Joshua, and he leads the army of Israel fighting against Amalek. There's, I think, a hint or an implication there in verse 14 that God has long-range plans for Joshua, because he says, the Lord said to Moses, "Write this for a memorial in a book and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua." In other words, I want you to make sure Joshua knows this and remembers it. I believe there's a clear implication there that God had long-range plans that Joshua is going to, and we know he will, of course, ultimately become the leader over God's people, but it may be hinted at in that expression. This is the actual historical account of Israel fighting with Amalek. Of course, one of the famous things here was Moses' hands. As long as he held his hands up, Israel prevailed. But you can only hold your hands up for as long as they get so heavy, and you have to let them down. And when he let his hands down, then Amalek would prevail. And so Aaron and Hur, they set him on a rock, and they held his hands up so that Israel prevailed to the end of the battle. We have an expression we still use. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's not used tremendously anymore. But when you're helping someone, I especially hear it in terms of spiritual activities or work that we might do. We hold up his hands. And so maybe with the preachers that we support in gospel preaching, we hold up their hands. Well, that's where that notion or expression comes from, is this episode here in Exodus 17. Now, there's more to the story than is recorded here. And why was God so angry with Amalek that there's going to be war? There's perpetual war. And I'm going to wipe out the memory of Amalek. Go over to Deuteronomy 25. This might be worth noting in the margin. In your margin there at Exodus 17, you might want to write Deuteronomy 25, 17 through 19. It says, Moses, remember Deuteronomy is kind of Moses' farewell address. And he says, remember, this is Deuteronomy 25:17, remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way, when you were come forth out of Egypt, how he met thee by the way, and smote the hindmost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, when thou wast faint and weary, and he feared not God. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord thy God hath given thee rest from all thine enemies round about in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance to possess it, that thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, and thou shalt not forget it. So there's the supplemental information we needed. Why was this such a terrible thing that enraged God against the Amalekites? Well, because they had been, very underhanded and ugly. And so here's this massive caravan of the Israelites passing through. And they're just passing through, and they're trying to not violate the people whose lands they're crossing. But the Amalekites come from behind. So in this big caravan of people, you can imagine that the elderly, maybe people with very young children, those who are sick or feeble, they would lag behind. That would be the hindmost part of the caravan. And the Amalekites, instead of taking on the lead brigades, where the fighting men might have been, they're attacking from the back, from where the weak and the feeble are. And that just obviously just enraged God that they would do such a thing as that. And so he issues this proclamation against them. And then, of course, go to 1 Samuel 15. The actual fulfillment of that takes place under King Saul. You know that story well, right? In 1 Samuel 15, King Saul, who is already showing himself not to be such a sterling character, 1 Samuel 15, verse 1, Samuel also said to Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint thee to be king over the people, over Israel. Now therefore hearken unto the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I remember what Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. So they're to utterly destroy the Amalekites, right? And if you just read 1 Samuel 15, you why? Wonder why the proclamation against them was so emphatic. Why are they being treated that way? And it answers, when we put all these puzzle pieces together, we see that that's why it was that way. Thoughts or comments on any of that? Anybody? What about those children, the Amalekite children that they killed? You know, some people have a real, so when you read those kind of episodes, and that's not the only one in the Old Testament, but when you read those kind of episodes in the Old Testament, some people, oh man, that's terrible. That's awful. I mean, how could a loving God declare such genocide against even the children of the Amalekites? Wait.
So where are those children going? And obviously, God spared them from going to those places.
Yeah.
In their nation, they would have been worshiping false gods, and God would have judged them.
Now I think that's the right answer, because we tend to judge it just from a purely this world perspective. They're innocent children. Why should they be punished? But the fact of the matter is that they died in their innocence, and they will eternally be spared from punishment. And so but we're real inclined to look at it just from a physical, this world perspective. But if you take the big picture into account, then I think that really modifies the issue. Any other thoughts? Okay. So, again, that's sort of our first exposure to Joshua. Let's go back to Exodus. In chapter 24, we read about him again. Exodus chapter 24, beginning verse 12. The Lord said to Moses, come up to me into the mount and be there, and I will give thee tables of stone and a law and commandments which I have written, that thou mayest teach them. And Moses rose up, and his minister Joshua. And Moses went up to the mount of God, and he said to the children, tarry ye here for us till we come again unto you. And behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. If any man have any matters to do, let him come unto them. So, again, I think you can see clearly that there's special intentions for Joshua. That he of the whole nation of Israel, he is singularly the one to go up on the mountain with Moses when Moses receives the law from God. Moses made multiple trips up on the mountain, but at least on this trip, Joshua is with him. And so he's a minister or a special servant with Moses. But I thought it was kind of interesting. Notice what he would have seen when he was there. Verse 15, keep reading there. And Moses went up into the mount, and a cloud covered the mount, and the glory of the Lord abode upon Mount Sinai. And the cloud covered it 6 days, and the seventh day he called unto Moses out of the midst of the cloud. And the sight of the glory of the Lord was like devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moses went into the midst of the cloud and gat him up into the mount, and Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. So we've always thought, at least I have always thought about what Moses was exposed to on Mount Sinai and the wonders and amazement that he beheld while he was on the mountain. But Joshua was there too. Joshua saw that. He may not have had the full view of things that Moses did, but he was there. And so maybe, just possibly, that would account for how he was devoted to God, the awe and the respect and the honor that he had for God. I mean, if you had seen that, if you had been such a one to see what Joshua saw on the mountain, I think that would change you. I mean, you're going to devotedly serve this God without fail. You're not going to waver. We're going to talk later in the lesson when he says, choose you this day who you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. I mean, there was never any doubt with Joshua. And I'm just wondering if he had to have been just incredibly exemplary to be chosen to be Moses' minister and the ultimate replacement of Moses. But I just wonder if that exposure on the mountain didn't also seal the deal in his heart, and there was never any question thereafter. Any thoughts or comments, Monty?
You know, the children of Israel didn't obviously get to go up on the mountain as far as even Joshua did. They didn't get to go up at all. But even in verse 17, it says, the sight of the glory of the Lord was like a consuming fire in the eyes of the children of Israel. So they seen something spectacular too. So they should have been equally, maybe not equally, but they knew something. I mean, they just seen all the plagues in Egypt. They've been delivered from Egypt. It hadn't been that long, maybe 2 or 3 months, I think, probably at this time. So, and then seeing God come into the presence and this overwhelming thing that's going on.
Yeah.
They should have been overwhelmed themselves, or they should have never thought.
I think so too. As you say, they also were exposed to enough that, you know, because frequently, you know, the Lord would say, I brought you up with a mighty hand out of the land of Egypt, and how could you do this that you're doing now? So, Matt?
Yeah, we see with the children of Israel, it was such a fearful sight when God spoke to them out of heaven on the mount that they begged Moses, said, you speak to us. We don't
you go talk to God.
We don't want anything like that kid. And they swore undying allegiance to God from that day forward, but it didn't last.
They didn't live up to it. Exactly right. Exactly right. All right, let's skip ahead. Question 3 takes us to Numbers 14. We're still talking about Joshua. And here, of course, is an outstanding event in the life of Joshua's faithful service to God. Remember, this is when they came near to the promised land, and they sent spies in to spy out the land. And so one representative from each of the 12 tribes was chosen, and Joshua was chosen to represent his tribe. And of course, his counterpart was Caleb, Joshua and Caleb. Look in chapter 14 at verse 6. Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, which were of them that searched the land, rent their clothes. Now, I guess we probably should give a little more background. When the spies came back, the majority opinion of the spies was, it's a wonderful land. It's amazing. Remember they cut down one cluster of grapes, and it took 2 men to carry the one cluster of grape on a pole on their shoulders. I mean, there was no doubt it was an overwhelmingly incredible land, but there were also mighty fortified cities, and there were actually some people there who were among the giants. We talked somewhat about the giants a few weeks ago. We won't get off into that again, but they were scared to death. No doubt it's great land, but we can't take it. There's no way. There's no way in the world that we'll be able to take it, because there's giants. The cities are great walled, fortified cities. It's just we have come out of Egypt for nothing. And so Joshua and Caleb respond to that here. Chapter 14, verse 6. Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, which were of them that searched the land, rent their clothes, and they spake unto all the company of the children of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to search it is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delight in us, then he will bring us into the land and give it us, a land that floweth with milk and honey. Only rebel not ye against the Lord, neither fear ye the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their defense is departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Fear them not. But all the congregation bade stone them with stones, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle and the congregation of the congregation before all the children of Israel. So here, Joshua and Caleb expressed confidence that the others didn't have. That the 10 other spies were all just totally negative. We can't do it. We'll never make it. Joshua and Caleb notice they didn't contradict the report. They didn't say, oh, those giants are nothing. They actually are not that tall. I stood beside one of those giants, and he was only an inch or two bigger than me. They're not really giants. And the walls of those cities are so flimsy, a good hard gust of wind would knock them down. We can do it. That's not what they said. They didn't contradict the report of the other 10 spies. Yeah, there's giants there. Yeah, the cities are great walled cities, fortified. But God is with us. They are bread for us because God is on our side. And so the total confidence of Joshua and Caleb was in the fact that God would bless them and God would deliver the land to them as he had promised. And so they expressed that great confidence. So in this episode, of course we're focusing on Joshua, but Joshua and Caleb expressed great faith in God. And I think the other thing for the two of them is that they were willing to go against the majority. There's always the temptation that we want to be in the majority. We want to do and think like everybody else is doing and thinking. And it's hard to stand apart. If the majority is going the wrong way, it takes real strength and courage to stand apart from the majority and do something different. And Joshua and Caleb did. Again, that's a well-remembered episode, but certainly is a great example for us. Thoughts or comments here? Wade?
People wonder, today, our military and stuff, we may have said something and say the same things to those guys. We can't take it with our force, we're not going to be able to do it. Those people were being led by the Spirit of God day and night. God was right there present in their camp all the time. And they saw the miracles that were happening. It's just amazing.
It is. It's amazing that they had that lack of faith after all that they had seen. Monty was talking about this a minute ago. After all that they had experienced, even before they left Egypt, and the power of God. People have short-lived memories about good things that God does for them, or good things that other people do for them even. So here they've been slaves in Egypt. Egypt at the time was the most powerful country in the world. And God just devastated them. And the Israelites saw all that and benefited from all that. They're not that far removed from Egypt. Remember, this was on their initial approach to the south of the Promised Land. It hadn't been 40 years. They haven't done the 40 years of wandering. The 40 years of wandering is going to come from this episode. So they were not that far removed from Egypt. The very people who are saying we can't do it were the ones who saw what happened in Egypt, and the most powerful nation in the world was brought to its knees by the power of God, and yet they're doubting. So, I believe there's a great lesson for us, in our relationship with God, but I think also in our relationship with one another. We should not be so quick to forget good that has been done for us. People these days, I use the expression that people these days look at it as, what have you done for me lately? I don't care what you may have done for me a while back. What have you been doing for me lately? If you haven't been doing good things for me lately, then I'm not too grateful or mindful. We need to be different from that. The Israelites look despicable in this episode, don't they? Joshua and Caleb stand out as just shining stars, but the mass majority of all the Israelites just look despicable in this. Thoughts or comments, Lonnie?
When you think about Joshua and Caleb here, they weren't just standing up against the majority, but they were practically two alone out of a nation of probably a couple of million.
Yeah.
Maybe not entirely alone, but Moses and some of the priests may have been with them. But still, they was 600,000 plus fighting men. They was two against that crowd, we might say. And so here they are. It's not just that they was in a minority. They were alone in this, but they was still ready to stand up and say, no, I don't care what you say. God's with us and God can take care of us. Yeah. And God will take care of us. And I think we need to have that same attitude. We need to have enough faith in God that He's going to keep His promises to us, that it doesn't matter who we're standing up against, who we're disputing with or discussing with. We don't need to be afraid of them. We need to have confidence that we've got God's Word in front of us, and we can defend the truth with that.
Exactly right. Anybody else? Any thoughts? Tina?
Well, this kind of goes to what Lonnie was saying, that, like you were saying, that they look despicable in this instance, but how do we look to God? Because they could see these giants, and they could see, what was waiting on them, and they were having to go in and fight, and they were afraid, and yet how often are we afraid that we need to talk to somebody about the gospel?
Yeah.
And how must we look? I mean, if we can say these people were terrible, to us, and they saw the enemy there, they saw the fear or whatever, and how often do we say fear keeps us spreading? So how must we look to God?
I think you're right. I think you're exactly right. All right. Let's go on down to look at question 5. We said that there's probably a pretty good indicator that God had special plans for Joshua already in things that have been revealed and said and done in regards to him. But in chapter 27, it is actually stated that this is what's going to happen. Numbers 27, beginning verse 18. The Lord said unto Moses, Take thee Joshua the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay thy hand upon him, and set him before Eleazar the priest, and before all the congregation, and give him a charge in their sight. And thou shalt put some of thine honor upon him, that all the congregation of the children of Israel may be obedient. And he shall stand before Eleazar the priest, and shall ask counsel for him after the judgment of the Urim before the Lord. At his word shall they go out, and at his word shall they come in, both he and all the children of Israel with him, even all the congregation. And Moses did as the Lord commanded him. And he took Joshua and set him before Eleazar the priest and before all the congregation. And he laid his hands upon him and gave him a charge, and as the Lord commanded by the hand of Moses. So here, I mean, if you had any doubt about that, here it's plainly stated that he is going to be the ultimate leader of the Israelites. I've got a question for you there in verse 18. Take thee Joshua the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay thy hand upon him. What do you think that expression is? Anybody want to dive on that one? It could mean two things, couldn't it? One could be the Spirit of God is in him, even maybe to the point that the Spirit of God empowers him to work miracles, although I don't think it up to this point in time that there's any indication that he had personally worked miracles. So it could be the Spirit of God, or it could be a reference to his particular spirit, the kind of spirit that is in him. What do you think on that, Wade?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I would say they added some words there. I don't think the word leadership is in the text there, but I'm inclined to think that it is that, though. I'm more leaning in the direction that he has a unique spirit, his personal spirit, his spirit of faith and devotion and obedience. I think I'm inclined to think that, and I'm reading the King James Version here, and of course, all the punctuations are added by men, but apparently the King James translators at some point did not believe it was the Spirit of God. They didn't capitalize S. They believed it was a reference to his own spirit. He has the kind of spirit I'm looking for. You know, if you were a boss on a job and you had to hire an employee for a very special assignment or position, you might say, I want that guy because I like the way I like the way he thinks. I like the way he acts. He's got the right kind of disposition. He's got a good attitude. You might use those kind of expressions, and I think this is sort of that. Tom? Oh, Karen.
Just if you go back to Numbers 14, I know it's talking about Caleb here, but Joshua and Caleb were both included in verse 24. It says, but my servant Caleb, he has had a different spirit than his father forward. So
Yeah. And they're definitely talking about Caleb's personal spirit. And I think, like you, that him and Caleb were like two peas in a pod there, you know. And I think that's what's being said here. James.
The New American Standard does capitalize the word
Does it?
spirit here. It does make reference to Deuteronomy, the 34th chapter. After Moses had died, it goes in verse 9. Now Joshua, the son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him, and the Israelites listened to him.
Yeah, but that's after this.
Well, this is after Moses had died. So this is going backwards in time,
Yeah.
pointing to a different time.
I don't disagree that God bestowed special blessings upon him to be the leader of Israel. But it seems to me that here his selection to that place wherein he would receive those special blessings from God was more based upon his own existing personal spirit. I don't know. I wouldn't fall out with anybody on either way, but it just seems to me that works better in this context. Wade?
That's kind of the way he did. I mean, he was looking for a man of his own heart.
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying is the same thing as what he's doing with Joshua. He's looking for a man of his own heart.
Yeah. Again, I think it'd go either way. I'm not gonna. I wouldn't feel badly if you thought different than I do on that. It's just the way I'm seeing it. Sarah.
He would have been an inspired man. He was a prophet and wrote the
But was he when he was chosen? That's my point. I don't know when that happened. No, yeah, I don't doubt that the Spirit of God came upon him in an extraordinary way. But I'm wondering if at this point, when he's being chosen to this job, whether that's the basis of the choosing or whether the basis of the choosing is his own spirit. It's a toss-up, I think. Tom?
Some of the structure of the word here, going back and looking at some definitions of things. There's a lot of it leads to that, the Spirit of God being, but there's also some aspects of courage and vigor and, sort of taking leadership or, sort of standing out. If you sort of look at the people of Israel, that they had something like, close to 400 years between Joseph and the time they leave Egypt to come out. So, they've got a lot of superstitions that are tied into Egypt and things like that all the time. Some were looking for this deliverer all along, but most people are just followers. We see followers today. Why do people practice the religious practice they do? Because they're too lazy to go through and look up for themselves.
Not searching for themselves.
They'll follow whatever somebody tells them.
Mm-hmm.
And you have people within, the children of Israel that did the same thing. They didn't like what Moses was doing. They wanted to be sort of that leadership role. And so the children of Israel actually turned to some of these people sometimes, and God destroyed it.
So, but Joshua was different in that regard. I think you're right. All right. Let's move ahead. If you look on the second sheet of the lesson, question 7. How did God tell Joshua to speak as the oracles of God? Look at Joshua chapter 1, verse 7. Now this is, Moses died at the end of Deuteronomy, in the last chapter of Deuteronomy. And so starting in the book of Joshua, Joshua is now the leader. And God tells him in Joshua 1 verse 7, only be thou strong and very courageous, that thou mayest observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded thee. Turn not from it to the right hand or to the left, that thou mayest prosper whithersoever thou goest. This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and thou shalt have good success. And so, I think it's significant here that as Joshua now is just coming fully into this work, this role as the leader of God's people, that he is urged to be strong and courageous, verse 7. But notice the emphasis to observe and do according to the law. This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth. Thou shalt meditate it day and night. And so a lot of emphasis on what has already been revealed. Don't go to the right hand or left. Don't depart from it. Don't do anything different. Do just as the law that was given to Moses. Probably a lot of lessons could be drawn from that. Here's Joshua, who's such a great person. You'd have to say he's very, very sincere and genuine, and got a good heart. Be sure you keep the law. Be sure you do just what I revealed to Moses. God's always been that way, and the people today who tend to think otherwise, I just think they haven't read their Bibles very thoroughly, because they're just always, just repeatedly through the Scriptures, an emphasis on do what I said, do it the way I said it. And he's telling that to Joshua. Joshua primarily did do so. We're going to talk here in a minute about the defeat at Ai when they sort of let down their guard a little bit. But I would argue that in the case of Joshua, he's just consistently devoted and obedient, and he sets a great pattern. That next question we want to look at is what happened at Ai. Skip over to chapter 7. Now, you remember that how God delivered Jericho to the Israelites. And they were to take no personal spoil from the city of Jericho. When Jericho was one of those great walled cities that they were so worried about, and God delivered it to them. The walls of Jericho fell down. God gave them the victory at Jericho. But there was a problem, because one individual, Achan, took some of that spoil, personally took some of that spoil and hid it in his tent. And so when they went, notice chapter 7, verse 1, but the children of Israel committed a trespass in the accursed thing, for Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took of the accursed thing, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against the children of Israel. So this is one guy, and now the whole nation is going to suffer a consequence because of what one person did. Boy, there's a lot of lessons here, isn't there? We often hear people, Christians in the local congregation sometimes say, what I do is none of your business. You just keep your nose out of my business. It's none of your business what I do. It actually is, right? Because we are in fellowship with one another, and what one does affects what others do. And you sure see that here in the case of Achan. So they went up to Ai. So Jericho was a great mighty walled city, but it fell. A nearby little town, just a village, it wasn't even significant. When the spies went to spy it out, they said, don't send a big army up. There's such a little place. that you don't have to send a big army up there. Just send a few guys up there. You know, send a few thousand. You don't have to send the whole army of Israel up there because it's just a little place. Well, they did that, and when they went up there, they got whipped. And oh man, now things are really looking bad. And they finally figured out that the reason why they got whipped in the initial battle at Ai is because there's this, you know, what's the expression we use? Sin in the camp. You know, you still hear people using that expression from time to time. There's sin in the camp. And so they went through a process and they figured out what the sin was. If you look at verse 21, verse 20, Achan answered Joshua and said, so they went through this process of elimination and they got down to Achan. He's the guilty party. Achan answered Joshua and said, indeed, I have sinned against the Lord God of Israel, and thus have I done. When I saw among the spoils a goodly Babylonish garment and 200 shekels of silver and a wedge of gold of 50 shekels weight, then I coveted them and took them, and behold, they are hid in the earth in the midst of my tent, and the silver under it. So Joshua sent messengers, and they ran into the tent, and behold, it was hid in his tent, the silver under it. And they took them out of the midst of the tent and brought them to Joshua and to the children of Israel and laid them out before the Lord. And Joshua and all Israel with him took Achan the son of Zerah, and the silver and the garment and the wedge of gold, and his sons and his daughters and his oxen and his asses and his sheep and his tent and all that he had, and they brought them unto the valley of Achor. And Joshua said, why hast thou troubled us? The Lord shall trouble thee this day. And all Israel stoned him with stones and burned them with fire after they had stoned him with stones. And they raised over him a great heap of stones unto this day. So the Lord turned from the fierceness of his anger. Wherefore the name of that place was called the valley of Achor to this day. So I know what would happen in our day and time. You know, everybody would have been sympathetic to Achan. You know, poor Achan. In fact, you can almost imagine that in our day and time, Achan would have tried to assume the victim status. You know, every time when somebody does something wrong in our day and time, they want to turn around and act like they're the victim in the event. And so people today might say, "Oh, poor Achan." I mean, come on. No, that wasn't the way it was. And Joshua led the people in a very severe, obviously, ultimately severe punishment against this fellow who had so sinned. You know, and it was what God wanted. And notice the last verse says God's wrath was turned because they took care of this issue. When we don't take care of disciplinary things as we should, and we're not doing the will of God, and God's not pleased. God is pleased when we do, as you know, so we're obviously in a much different time. We're not going to stone anybody with stones. But in our day and time, when it's necessary to exercise discipline against an unfaithful member of a local congregation, people get upset about that. It's too mean, too harsh, too unloving. Again, that opinion doesn't line up very well with these kinds of Bible examples when there was fierce discipline exercised against those who had done wrong. Thoughts or comments, anybody? All right. Well, we've got just a few minutes left, and that takes us to the end of Joshua's story. Skip over to chapter 24. So all through the book of Joshua, right, they are in the promised land. They are conquering the promised land. They're taking possession of the promised land. And all of that under Joshua's guidance and direction. And so he is about to die. He dies at the end of the book of Joshua. Verse 14, chapter 24, verse 14. Now therefore, this is what Joshua was saying to the Israelites. Now therefore, fear the Lord thy God and serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the flood and in Egypt, and serve ye the Lord. And so the first part of this is fear the Lord, serve in sincerity and truth, put away any other gods that you might be tempted to express devotion to. You know, I think that's pretty good. That's probably pretty good instruction for us. Fear God, serve him in sincerity and truth. Don't let anything else come between you and God. Don't worship anything else Of course, our worship is materialism probably, but we're not inclined to bow down to an idol, but we do worship our material things. So that instruction would be pretty good instruction for us. Joshua would speak to us from the grave and say, fear God, serve him in sincerity and truth. Don't let anything come between you and God. Don't serve anything. Don't let anything come before God in your devotions. And then, of course, the very famous verse, Joshua 24:15. If it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land ye dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. You've no doubt heard dozens, if not hundreds, of sermons through the years based upon Joshua 24:15, and it is such a powerful statement. I know, and I've seen in people's houses, maybe, I don't think it's so popular anymore, but women used to do needlepoint, and they would make these little needlepoint framed things, and I very often have seen that verse, choose you this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And it's so powerful. I mean, you just can't get around it. And that's what made Joshua a success. That's what made him a great man of God and an example for us to imitate. Is because there was just no doubt. There was no question. I want to tell you how it's going to be for me and my house. I've thought that parents, fathers in particular, need to have that kind of determined outlook on it. I don't know. You do what you're going to do, but I'm going to tell you how it's going to be in my house. As for me and notice he didn't say just for me. He said, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And so he expressed a strong leadership role in his family, and he was determined to see it through. This just really great, really powerful. We're out of time, but to skip down in chapter 24, verse 29. It came to pass after these things that Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. And they buried him in the border of his inheritance in Timnath-Serah, which is in Mount Ephraim on the north side of the hill of Gaash. Here's the strong statement, verse 31. And Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders that overlived Joshua, and which had known all the works of the Lord that he had done for Israel. That's really something, isn't it? So here's Israel, who are a rebellious people. They always have been. They rebelled against Moses. Moses had his hands full with these people. As he was bringing them up out of Egypt, they were constantly griping and complaining and trying to rebel against him. The good man that Moses was, Moses had his hands full dealing with these rebellious Israelites. How'd they do under Joshua? Well, that's pretty amazing. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua. And not only that, but also all the days of the elders that overlived Joshua, which had known all the works of the Lord that he had done for Israel. He was such a strong, positive leader and influence on Israel that even when he died, his influence continued throughout another generation, or most of a generation at least, of people who had known him. His example, even though he was dead, his influence was so strong that it survived him. His influence continued on even after his death. That's really amazing. He was truly a great man of God. Any final thoughts? We're out of time. Any final thoughts on Joshua?
Hey, Greg, I'm stuck on Achan.
Okay.
The discipline there was to essentially eliminate him. Right?
Eliminate him.
Eliminate him.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Church discipline today is more designed to shame the person or
To bring him back, really.
Right.
Yeah.
So why so massive hatred?
Well, I think, that we live in sort of, I guess the New Testament expression, fullness of time. We live in a time when we see all of God's workings more completely than they did then. Their understandings of God and his workings were more limited than ours. We have the perfect perspective of, all of God's work. Well, no, I wouldn't say that so much, but I would say that our time is a more spiritually directed time and theirs is a more physically directed time. I don't think that's exclusively so, but I would say we live in a time when our emphasis is on spiritual service. Theirs was on physical service. And so that probably would affect, so when we go out to the nations of the world, we don't go out with swords and spears, we go out with the Word of God. They went out with swords and spears when they went against the nations of the world to conquer them. So it's probably a very deep question, but I would probably argue that it has to do more of a physical emphasis in that time, and we have more of a spiritual emphasis. I don't know if that helps. Next week, Lord willing, his counterpart, we talked about him some tonight, but Joshua's counterpart, lesson 5 on Caleb, next week, Lord willing.